Hi guys, so tonight we're walking into the deep shadowy birthplace of apples where the fruit is not yet neat, red, polished, and waiting in a supermarket pyramid, but wild, thorny, stubborn, and slightly dangerous. You hear leaves whisper above you, you smell damp bark, cold soil, and the faint honeyed scent of fruit beginning to soften on the branch. Somewhere in the dark, a bear sniffs the air with far better manners than most dinner guests, and a horse nudges fallen apples with its warm breath. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what your local time is right now. It is always strange and lovely to imagine all these quiet rooms around the world, glowing softly in the night. Now, dim the lights, and step beneath the ancient trees of Central Asia, where the story of the apple begins long before orchards, pies, cider presses, lunch boxes, or that one lonely fruit rolling around at the bottom of a school bag. You are standing in the foothills of the Tian Shan Mountains, in what is now Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and nearby regions of Central Asia. The air is thin and cool. The mountain slopes rise in dark folds around you, their ridges fading into mist, their peaks catching pale light. Under your boots, the ground is uneven, soft with leaf litter, broken twigs, and old fruit. You hear insects ticking in the grass. You hear birds calling from high branches. You feel the brush of thorny stems against your sleeve, as if the forest is gently reminding you not to move too proudly through someone else's home. Here, wild apple trees do not stand in tidy rows. They lean, twist, crowd, and compete. Some grow small and crooked, their branches tangled with hawthorn, apricot, and walnut. Others rise tall and broad, with heavy limbs that offer shade to animals moving through the understory. Their fruit is not uniform. One apple may be yellow and tart enough to make your face fold into itself. Another may be red, fragrant, and sweet. A third may be small, bitter, and frankly rude. Nature, as usual, has no interest in brand consistency. The main wild ancestor of the modern domestic apple is Malus sieversii, a species native to these Central Asian forests. That is one of the solid anchors of the apple's history. When scientists compare the DNA of modern apples with wild relatives, the trail points strongly back to these mountain forests. You can imagine the discovery not as a one shining moment, but as a slow recognition, like realizing a familiar song has been playing quietly in the next room all along. The apples on kitchen tables across the world carry a memory of this place inside them. But you are not alone among these trees. Long before humans begin shaping apples into cultivated varieties, animals are already doing their own kind of orchard work. Bears climb and break branches. Deer browse, wild boar root through fallen fruit, birds peck at soft flesh. Horses and other large mammals may swallow fruit whole, carrying seeds across distance before leaving them, politely or not, in a packet of fertilizer. The forest floor is not just a carpet of decay, it is a nursery, a dining hall, and a very slow transportation network. You bend down and pick up a fallen apple. Its skin is cool and slightly waxy beneath your fingers. A bruise gives way under your thumb. When you bring it near, the smell is sharp, sweet, and faintly fermented. It carries the scent of autumn even if you do not yet have a calendar. You bite carefully. The flesh cracks. The taste is surprising, bright at first, then sour, then mellow. There is nothing bland about it. A wild apple is not trying to be convenient. It is trying to survive. That survival depends on a little biological bargain. Apple trees wrap their seeds in flesh that attracts animals. Animals eat the flesh and move the seeds. It's simple enough, though nature has a way of making simple things wildly complicated. Apple seeds do not usually grow into trees identical to their parents. Plant an apple seed from a sweet fruit, and you may get something sour, bitter, mealy, tough, or occasionally wonderful. Every seed is a gamble. Every sapling is a tiny experiment. This is one reason apples become so diverse, and also one reason later humans must learn grafting if they want to preserve a beloved variety. But here in the beginning, no one is labelling varieties or arguing about crispness. The forest is doing its own slow work. You move deeper into the trees and the atmosphere changes. The sunlight breaks into green fragments. The air smells of moss, resin, and overripe fruit. A fallen apple splits open near a stone, attracting wasps. Their wings make a sleepy buzzing sound, not quite threatening, more like a tiny committee meeting with no agenda. Somewhere nearby, a bear may have passed recently. You see disturbed leaves, claw marks in bark, and a scatter of half-eaten fruit. The apple, even now, is part of a larger world of hunger, movement, and chance. Humans enter this world not as inventors of the apple, but as latecomers with good noses. Imagine small bands of people moving through these mountain corridors thousands of years ago. They know the plants around them because knowing means survival. They notice which fruits sweeten after frost. They learn which trees bear heavily. They remember the slope where apples grow larger, the hollow where the air stays cool, the patch where birds gather in late summer. Nobody needs a written recipe to understand sweetness. You taste, you remember, you return. The first relationship between humans and apples is probably not farming in the neat sense. It is gathering. It is noticing. It is carrying fruit from one place to another. It is perhaps tossing cores near a camp, where seeds may sprout later in disturbed soil. Historians still argue whether early people deliberately encouraged the best wild apple trees near settlements, or whether apples first followed human movement almost accidentally. The truth may be comfortably messy, which is often where history likes to sleep. A seed dropped beside a path can be both accident and beginning. There is a quiet drama in that thought. No king commands the apple into history. No scribe announces that civilization shall now enjoy snacks. Instead, someone hungry reaches for fruit. Someone else remembers a tree. A child spits seeds near a fire. A trader packs dried apples for a journey. A horse eats what falls beside a trail. Piece by piece, without ceremony. The apple begins to travel, and yet these wild forests are not gentle gardens, as the trees have thorns. The fruit varies wildly. The mountains can be harsh, with snow, sudden winds, and summers that dry the grasses to gold. You feel cold air slide down from the heights as evening gathers. The leaves tremble. The smell of fruit grows stronger close to the ground, where fermentation begins. Some apples are already turning soft, feeding yeasts, insects, animals, and the soil itself. The forest wastes very little. It has never heard of waste. Lucky forest. One quirky detail, almost too charming to ignore, is that the city of Almaty in Kazakhstan is often linked in name and identity with apples. Older forms of the name are commonly associated with the idea of an apple-rich place. Whether every neat translation people repeat is perfectly tidy is another matter, because names wander too, but the association is strong enough that apples remain a symbol of the region. Imagine living in a place whose very identity seems to smell faintly of orchards. Many cities get walls, battles, or gloomy statues. Almaty gets apples. Honestly, not a bad arrangement. You continue walking, and the wild apples begin to seem less like background scenery and more like characters. One tree carries small green fruit hidden among leaves. Another offers streaked red apples that shine in the low light. Another tree is half dead, hollowed by age, yet still flowering from one living branch. That persistence matters. Apples are members of the rose family, related to pears, quinces, hawthorns, and roses themselves. Once you know this, you may notice a faint family resemblance in the blossom's 5 petals, delicate symmetry, a softness that seems almost too graceful for a tree that can also scratch your hand if you're careless. In spring, these forests are not merely green, they bloom. You would see clouds of white and pale pink flowers scattered across the slopes, petals trembling in cool air. Bees move through them with soft insistence. The smell is gentle, floral, and fresh, quite different from the heavy sweetness of fallen autumn fruit. Apple history begins not just with eating, but with pollination, with insects, with weather, with timing. A late frost can ruin blossom. A warm spell can wake insects early. A storm can scatter petals before fruit sets, even before humans depend on apples. Apples depend on 1,000 fragile arrangements. This is important, because the apple's future power comes from its adaptability. It can grow in cool climates where many sweeter fruits struggle. It stores better than delicate berries. It dries. It ferments. It can be grafted. It can be carried. It can become food, drink, medicine, symbol, temptation, gift, and tax payment. Because history loves making one innocent fruit fill out far too much paperwork. For now, though, the apple is still wild. You hold another fruit in your hand as dusk thickens between the branches. Its skin is rougher than a supermarket apple, with tiny speckles and uneven colour. Your fingers grow sticky where the flesh has broken. The taste lingers at the back of your mouth. You can hear the forest settling into evening. Leaves murmur overhead. A bird gives one last call. Insects fade into a thinner sound. The air cools against your face. Somewhere beyond these trees are the roots that will one day carry apples into Persia, China, Greece, Rome, Europe, and across oceans. But here, in the mountain dusk, none of that has happened yet. There is only fruit hanging in a wild forest, bright against dark leaves. There is hunger. There is memory. There is the small surprise of sweetness in a difficult landscape. You stand quietly among the ancestors of nearly every apple you have ever known. The polished red apple in a child's lunch, the golden one sliced into a pie, the green one snapped open with a crisp crack, the cider apple too bitter to eat but perfect for pressing. All of them belong to a family whose old roots reach into this soil. The apple is not born in a palace. It is born in a rough, fragrant, animal-haunted forest, where sweetness is never guaranteed and every seed is a question. Night comes softly. The branches become black lines against a dim sky. Fallen apples lie in the grass like small moons, bruised and shining faintly. You breathe in the scent of earth, leaves, and fruit turning slowly back into soil. The world feels old, but not finished. It feels patient, and in that patience the apple waits, not yet world-changing, not yet famous, simply growing, dropping, sprouting, and offering its strange sweetness to anyone passing through. You follow the fruit into movement, not in a rush, not in a grand parade, but in the quiet, practical way useful things travel. A seed clings to a piece of discarded flesh. A dried slice is tucked into a leather pouch. A sapling grows beside a caravan stop where people water animals and complain, softly but sincerely, about the price of everything. The world is not yet connected by engines or cables, but it is connected by feet, hooves, wheels, hunger, gossip, and trade. You're walking along one of the many routes later gathered under the name Silk Roads. It is not one road, of course. That would be far too convenient, and history rarely has the manners to be convenient. Instead, it is a shifting web of tracks and towns, mountain passes and desert crossings, river valleys and market streets. People move silk, spices, metalwork, glass, horses, wool, stories, diseases, ideas, religions, and as tucked among all that serious business, fruit. The air around you is dry and sharp. Dust lifts under the hooves of pack animals. Bells tied to camels make a dull, irregular clinking sound, as if the caravan is half asleep and still trying to keep time. You smell sweat, leather, smoke, dung fuel, and the faint sweetness of dried fruit stored in woven bags. Your cloak gathers grit. Your lips taste of salt and wind. Far ahead, the track bends toward a settlement where travellers will bargain, rest, pray, mend harnesses, and search for something warm to drink. Apples are well suited to this restless world. Fresh ones bruise and spoil, yes, but they can still be carried for short distances. Sliced and dried, they become lighter, sweeter, and more obedient. Seeds, meanwhile, travel with almost rude ease. They hide inside fruit, pass through animals, fall beside paths, and sprout near places where people linger. In a world of caravans, armies, migrating families, and herders following seasonal grass, a seed has many chances to leave home. The mainstream historical fact is clear enough: long-distance exchange across Eurasia helped spread apple genetics far beyond Central Asia. As apples moved westward and eastward, they encountered other wild apple species and local growing conditions. Over many generations, this mixing helped create the broad genetic background of the domestic apple known today. The apple did not travel as a finished masterpiece. It travelled as a family argument, a botanical conversation, an unruly mixture of traits. Sweetness here, firmness there, fragrance somewhere else. Disease resistance from a cousin that nobody praised at dinner, but everyone quietly needed. You pause at a caravanserai as evening gathers. The building is thick-walled, built around a courtyard where animals kneel with theatrical reluctance. A fire burns low. Someone stirs a pot that smells of onions, grain, and mutton. The smoke curls upward and catches beneath the roofed edges of the courtyard. Traders sit in small groups, speaking languages you only partly understand. Coins click, cloth rustles. A donkey objects to existence with a long, offended bray. Nearby, a bowl of dried apples sits beside nuts and flatbread. Their edges are curled and darkened. When you touch one, it is leathery, slightly sticky, and cool from the night air. You place it on your tongue. The sweetness is concentrated, deep and mellow, with a faint tang that wakes the mouth. It is travel food, patient food, the kind of food that does not demand ceremony. It asks only to be packed well and not forgotten under something damp. You chew slowly while listening to the courtyard settle. This is one way apples move not as royal treasures, but as useful companions. A traveller may not write a poem about a dried apple, though, honestly, perhaps someone should. It is small, loyal, and much less dramatic than a camel. The Silk Roads also create meetings between growers. Imagine a merchant noticing fruit at a market and asking where it came from. Imagine a gardener collecting seeds from a particularly good apple. Imagine grafting knowledge moving in fragments, passed from one orchard keeper to another, not always with full understanding, sometimes wrapped in superstition or local habit. Agricultural skill rarely spreads like a clean line on a map. It moves through imitation, memory, marriage, conquest, curiosity, and the ancient human habit of saying. That looks useful. I would like some of that. In oasis towns, apples find protected pockets of moisture and care. You see irrigation channels glinting in moonlight, drawing water through gardens that seem almost miraculous beside dry plains. Poplars rustle, pomegranates hang like lanterns, grapevines twist over frames, apple trees stand among apricots, almonds, and mulberries. Their leaves are darker in the evening, their branches trained by human hands. The smell here is different from the mountain forest. It is garden smell, wet earth, cut stems, ashes from cooking fires, fruit stored in clay rooms, and the clean mineral scent of water moving through channels. Scholars still debate whether the earliest managed apples spread mainly through deliberate human selection or through repeated accidental planting along travel corridors. The answer may not be a clean choice. People could value apples without fully controlling them. They could carry seeds intentionally and still be surprised by the results. They could protect a promising tree without knowing what its children would become. History is full of half-planned miracles. The apple fits that mood perfectly. You pass through a market where baskets of fruit are arranged beneath awnings. Some apples are small and greenish. Some are flushed with red. Others are yellow, with skins that catch the dusty sunlight. A seller cuts one open with a small knife and offers a slice. The blade makes a soft, wet sound. The flesh is dense, more tart than sweet, but refreshing. Around you, voices overlap prices, blessings, jokes, warnings about road conditions. A child reaches for a fallen apple and is quickly scolded, proving that certain human scenes are eternal. Eastward, apples meet Chinese traditions of fruit growing, garden design, and symbolism. Westward, they move toward Iranian lands, the Caucasus, Anatolia, and eventually the Mediterranean. Along these routes, apples do not replace local fruits, they join them. They become part of a larger fruit culture where sweetness matters, but so do fragrance, storage, medicine, ritual, and status. A fruit may be eaten, gifted, dried, cooked, pressed, or praised in verse. It may sit in a market stall one day and in a noble garden another. The apple is learning to wear many costumes, and some of them are quite flattering. A quirky tidbit lives in the language of apples, across Eurasia. Words for apple and other round fruits sometimes blur in old texts and translations. In several traditions, a word that later readers imagine as apple may have referred to almost any desirable fruit, quince, pomegranate, citron, or something now difficult to identify. So when an ancient tale mentions a golden apple, you should not always picture the tidy lunchbox fruit you know. It might be a poetic fruit, a symbolic fruit, or a translator's fruit, which is the slipperiest variety of all. Very nutritious for confusion. This matters because the apple spreads not only as biology, but as an idea. Around fruit with colour, scent, and sweetness becomes easy to use in stories. It can stand for beauty, temptation, youth, rivalry, healing, or desire. Traders carry goods, but storytellers carry shapes. A shining fruit in a tale can cross borders faster than a basket in a wagon. In this way, apples travel in mouths twice, once as food, once as language. You walk beside a line of horses descending from a mountain pass. Their breath steams in the cold. Snow lies in dirty patches along the path. The animals are loaded with bundles, and among the bundles are sacks of provisions. The leather straps are stiff beneath your fingers when you help tighten one. Your hands ache from the chill. A rider breaks a wrinkled apple with both thumbs and shares it with a child wrapped in wool. The fruit is not perfect. Its skin is tough, its flesh slightly grainy, but the child smiles because sweetness on a hard road is never a small thing. At another stop, you see apple seeds drying on a cloth near a doorway. Perhaps they are meant for planting. Perhaps they have simply been saved because throwing away possibility feels unwise. An old gardener turns them with one finger. He knows some will fail. He knows some trees will bear fruit too sour for eating. But he also knows that every so often, a seedling surprises everyone. In a world without modern breeding stations, patience is the laboratory. The experiment takes years. The results hang quietly from branches. The atmosphere along the road changes with each landscape. In valleys, you hear running water and the soft knock of wooden tools in gardens. In deserts, you hear wind scraping sand against tent cloth. In towns, you hear metal workers, animals, bargaining voices, and evening prayers. Everywhere, apples adapt to human rhythms. They appear in provisions, in orchards, in rumours of better fruit beyond the next ridge. They become worth carrying because they are useful, and worth improving because they are pleasurable. That combination is dangerous. Humans will forgive a useful thing for being dull. They will forgive a pleasurable thing for being impractical, but useful and pleasurable together. Now you have history leaning forward. Night settles over the caravanserai again. The courtyard grows quieter, the animals fold into sleep. A few travellers remain awake, murmuring under blankets. The stars are bright above the open square, cold and crowded. You hold a small apple seed in your palm. It is dark, glossy, and almost weightless. It does not look like a world traveller. It looks like a speck, a comma in the long sentence of trade. Yet inside it sits uncertainty, and that uncertainty is its power. A seed may become nothing. It may dry, rot, freeze, or be eaten by a mouse with excellent timing, or it may fall into damp soil near a ditch, split open, root downward, and lift 2 green leaves into the light. Years later, someone may taste its fruit and pause, not because it is famous, not because a king has named it, because for one brief moment on a dusty road, the fruit is good. So you keep walking with the caravans, past watchfires and wells, past gardens tucked into oases, past mountain passes where snowmelt feeds narrow streams. The apple travels beside you, quiet and persistent. It does not conquer with armies. It does not announce itself with trumpets. It moves by appetite, chance, memory, and trade, slipping from hand to hand, seed to soil, tree to traveller, and under the wide night sky of Eurasia, the small fruit begins to belong to more than one place. You enter the ordered gardens of ancient empire, where the apple begins to look less like a wandering fruit and more like a possession, not merely something found, not merely something packed for a road, but something planted with intention, watched by gardeners, praised by poets, discussed by physicians, and stolen by mythic heroes who apparently had no respect for property boundaries. The path beneath your feet is swept clean. Fine dust rises softly around your sandals. The air smells of watered soil, crushed herbs, warm stone, and fruit ripening in the sun. Somewhere nearby, a fountain spills into a basin with a steady silver sound. Bees move lazily through blossoms. A gardener bends over a young tree, tying a branch with strips of fibre, his fingers stained by bark and earth. The orchard is no longer entirely wild. It has become a place of patience, status, and control. In the Persian world, gardens hold a special power. They are not just pleasant places to sit while pretending not to listen to court gossip. They are images of order set against dryness, heat, and uncertainty. A royal garden may contain shade trees, flowing water, flowering plants, and fruit trees arranged with care. To walk there is to feel a ruler's reach, made gentle water, brought where water is scarce, trees made fruitful, fragrance gathered into one enclosed space. The apple fits naturally into this vision. It is beautiful in flower, useful in fruit, and symbolic in shape. Round, fragrant, held easily in the palm like a small promise. You pass beneath branches trained along a wall where the stone still holds the day's warmth. Your fingertips brush leaves, smooth on top, slightly rough beneath. The fruit hanging above you is smaller than many modern apples, but carefully tended. Some are pale green, some blush faintly where sunlight strikes. A gardener lifts one and turns it, inspecting for blemishes. You hear the soft creak of irrigation gates, the scrape of a hoe, the murmur of workers speaking in low voices. This is agriculture as discipline, and also as theatre. A good orchard tells visitors that someone here understands time. The mainstream historical fact is that ancient Greek and Roman writers knew apples as cultivated fruits and discussed them in agricultural and medical contexts. Greek authors described fruit trees, grafting, and plant behaviour, while Roman agricultural writers treated orchards as serious elements of estate management. By the Roman period, apples were not obscure forest snacks. They were named, planted, improved, stored, and served. Some varieties were prized for flavour, others for keeping well, and some simply because wealthy people have always enjoyed owning things with special names. You move into a Greek garden, where the light is sharper and the air carries the smell of thyme, olive leaves, and sea salt drifting from somewhere beyond the hills. Here, the apple lives in thought as much as in soil. Greek myth gives shining fruit a dangerous glamour. A golden apple can start a quarrel among goddesses. A guarded tree can become a heroic challenge. A fruit offered in courtship can signal desire, invitation, or trouble, and often all three. Because myths are not known for healthy communication. A young person tosses an apple lightly from hand to hand. Its skin flashes in the sun. In some Greek customs and literary scenes, throwing an apple could be linked with love or flirtation. It sounds sweet until you imagine being hit in the shoulder by someone's romantic intentions. Still, the gesture reveals something important. The apple is portable symbolism. It can be food, gift, joke, signal, prize, and insult, depending on aim. A quirky tidbit rests inside those famous golden apples of myth. They may not have been apples in the modern sense at all. Some later readers and scholars have wondered whether certain golden apples were quinces, citrons, oranges, or another glowing fruit transformed by translation and imagination. The ancient world did not always sort fruit with the tidy labels modern shoppers expect. A golden fruit in a story might be botanical, poetic, or just extremely good at causing divine drama. The apple, whether literal or not, benefited from the confusion. It inherited radiance. You step into a shaded room where a physician or learned household manager examines fruit laid on a table. The room smells of wax tablets, dried herbs, linen, and a faint sourness from stored produce. Apples appear in ancient medicine not as miracle cures, but as foods with qualities. Writers in the Greek and Roman medical traditions often thought about diet through balance cooling, warming, drying, moistening, binding, loosening. An apple could be recommended or avoided depending on preparation, ripeness, and the body of the person eating it. Raw fruit might be judged differently from cooked fruit. Sweetness, acidity, and texture all mattered. You pick up an apple from the table, it is firm, cool in the shaded air, and heavier than it looks. When a knife cuts through it, the sound is crisp but not loud. The scent rises at once, sharp and floral. A slice touches your tongue, first tart, then faintly sweet. Ancient medicine may feel strange now, but the attention is familiar. People were already noticing what fruit did to hunger, digestion, thirst, and comfort. They may not have used modern chemistry, but they were not careless. They watched bodies. They watched seasons. They argued, naturally. Put enough educated people near a bowl of fruit, and someone will produce a theory. Historians still debate whether elite orchard culture shaped ordinary apple growing more strongly, or whether practical farmers and local gardeners drove most improvement from below, while aristocrats merely took the credit. As aristocrats have been known to do with impressive calm. The evidence is uneven. Fancy texts preserve the voices of landowners, scholars, and administrators. But trees also grew beside farmhouses, roads, and village plots. Many important choices may never have been written down: which tree to spare, which cutting to share, which fruit to store, which sour little apple to press instead of curse. Now you find yourself on a Roman estate where the orchard has become part of a broader machine of production. The villa stands pale against the countryside. Roof tiles glow red in late afternoon. The smell of crushed grass mingles with smoke from a kitchen fire. Workers move among rows of trees with baskets. Somewhere, metal tools clink. A dog barks once, then decides the matter is not worth further comment. The air feels warm and organised, though not peaceful for everyone. The beauty of ancient estates often rested on the labour of enslaved people, tenants, and workers whose names rarely survive. Roman orchard management could be highly skilled. Grafting was especially important, because apple seeds produce unpredictable offspring. A valued tree could be preserved by joining a piece of it, called a scion, to the rooted body of another tree. You watch a gardener make a careful cut. The blade presses into living wood. The exposed surface looks pale and moist. He binds the joined pieces firmly so they may grow together. It is a strange act, almost surgical, and slightly magical even when understood. One tree lends its roots, another lends its fruiting identity. The result is continuity, which humans adore because nature keeps trying to improvise. You can feel the roughness of the binding material beneath your fingertips. The young graft stands vulnerable in the changing light. A failed graft dries and dies. A successful one becomes a quiet triumph over randomness. This technique allows a good apple to be repeated, carried, exchanged, and planted in new places, not copied perfectly in every condition, because weather and soil still have opinions, but preserved in essence. The orchard becomes a library of living varieties. Roman meals give the apple another stage. Fruit might appear toward the end of a dinner when conversation grows loose and lamps flicker. You recline in a dining room where oil flames tremble against painted walls. The air is thick with wine, roasted meats, garum, bread, perfume, and human warmth. A platter arrives with apples, pears, grapes, and perhaps quinces. The fruit cools the mouth. It marks abundance. It also lets a host display rich estates, storage, gardeners, trade, and taste. Nothing says relaxed evening like silently proving your agricultural superiority through dessert. The apple also enters language. Latin words connected with apples and fruit appear in names, descriptions, and classifications. The broader term for tree fruit could be flexible, and later languages inherited some of that slipperiness. You sense how the fruit becomes both specific and general, a real object and a category of desire. Round, scented, pleasant to hold, easy to imagine. The apple is becoming mentally convenient, which may be even more powerful than being delicious. Outside, evening lowers over the estate. The orchard cools quickly, leaves darken. The last bees vanish into hive shadow. Your hand rests on the bark of an older tree, ridged and dry, with patches of lichen near the trunk. It is not grand like a cedar or sacred looking like an ancient olive, but it has its own quiet dignity. It has fed hands that pruned it, mouths that praised it, servants who carried baskets, children who stole windfalls, physicians who classified it, and poets who made it more dramatic than it probably requested. The apple in imperial gardens is not one thing. It is luxury in a royal enclosure. It is a mythic spark in Greek storytelling. It is a medical food, a farm crop, a dessert, a grafted experiment, a symbol of beauty, and a small proof that human beings love taking something wild and persuading it to behave, sometimes gently, sometimes not. You leave the garden as the fountain keeps speaking to itself in the dusk. The air smells of damp soil and fading heat. An apple lies on a stone bench, forgotten for the moment, its skin catching the last orange light. You pick it up and feel its smooth weight settle into your palm. It is still just fruit, still flesh around seeds, still vulnerable to bruise and worm and weather. Yet around it now gather empires, myths, techniques, status, medicine, and desire. The apple has learned to sit at court without looking nervous. You step into medieval Europe through a low stone gateway, where the air is cool, damp, and faintly smoky. And the apple has become part of a slower, humbler world. The grand villas and polished garden theories have faded into monastery yards, manor fields, village lanes, and rough orchards fenced against wandering animals with absolutely no respect for horticulture. A bell rings somewhere above you, deep and patient. Its sound rolls across wet grass, over thatched roofs, past bare trees, and into the soft grey morning. You feel mud press around the edges of your shoes. The ground is uneven, patched with straw, hoof marks, and fallen leaves. The smell is strong but honest wood smoke, damp wool, animal breath, kitchen herbs, sour ale, wet bark, and apples stored in a cool room nearby. Nothing here is polished. Nothing here is arranged for a painting. This is the apple as daily companion, less golden symbol, more practical survivor. It feeds, sweetens, ferments, stores, comforts, and occasionally gets stolen by children who are then shocked, simply shocked, to discover consequences. You enter a monastery enclosure where stone walls hold back some of the wind. Inside, the garden is ordered with quiet care. There are beds of medicinal herbs, rows of cabbages, vines where the climate allows, and fruit trees trained near walls to catch warmth. The monks move softly in dark robes, their sleeves brushing against stems and leaves. You hear the scrape of a wooden rake. You hear water poured into a trough. You hear the steady murmur of prayer drifting from a chapel, blending with the cawing of crows in the orchard. A mainstream historical fact sits clearly in this scene. Medieval monasteries and manor estates played an important role in maintaining and cultivating orchards across Europe. Monks, nuns, estate stewards, and skilled gardeners planted fruit trees, grafted useful varieties, recorded agricultural practices, and managed land through the seasons. The apple was not only a snack, it was part of an organised rural economy, tied to storage, rents, feasts, fasting days, drink-making and medical care. You walk beside a monk carrying a basket of windfalls. The apples inside are mottled, bruised, and irregular. Some are good for eating, some are better for cooking, some are sharp and tannic, the sort of fruit that bites back and seems proud of it. He sorts them without drama. The best may go to the table. The bruised ones may become sauce or filling. The hard, bitter ones may be pressed. Medieval people are not sentimental about fruit. They are practical. If an apple cannot be charming, it can at least be useful. In the storage room, the air grows colder. You duck beneath a low beam and smell straw, dry wood, and fruit slowly breathing in the dark. Apples rest on shelves or in shallow layers, separated to keep rot from spreading too quickly. You touch one and feel its skin cool beneath your fingertips, slightly rough, not waxy or bright. Somewhere in the room, one apple has begun to spoil. You smell that faint sweet-sour warning, the little announcement that nature has started reclaiming its property. Food storage matters deeply here. Winter is not a decorative season. It is a test. Apples that keep well become valuable because they extend sweetness into cold months when fresh food grows scarce. Dried apples can be tucked away. Cooked apples can stretch grain dishes. Crabapples and sharper varieties can add flavour where sugar is rare and expensive. Honey exists, but it is precious. Spices exist, but mostly for those with money. The apple offers a local sweetness, modest but meaningful. You pass into a manor kitchen where the fire burns hot and low. The room smells of smoke, onions, bread crust, dripping fat, and fruit bubbling in a pot. A servant stirs apples with a wooden spoon, softening them into a thick mash. The spoon knocks against the side of the vessel with a dull sound. Steam touches your face, warm and wet. The apples collapse slowly, releasing a scent that is both sharp and comforting. It is the smell of autumn being persuaded to last a little longer. On feast days, apples might appear in pies, tarts, sauces, stuffings, and spiced dishes. In humbler homes, they may be baked in embers, cooked with oats, or eaten with bread and cheese. You hold a warm baked apple wrapped in a cloth. Its skin wrinkles and splits. The flesh inside is soft, almost creamy, and your fingers feel the heat through the linen. It is simple food, but in a room with rain tapping at the shutters, simple can feel luxurious. Medieval luxury does not always glitter. Sometimes it steams. The orchard outside belongs to rhythms of labour. In spring, you stand under pale blossoms while bees hum around your head. The air smells clean, floral, and damp. In summer, leaves thicken and shade the grass. In autumn, the ground thuds with falling fruit. In winter, the branches are black against a white sky. And pruning begins with numb hands and sharp tools. You feel the bark under your palm, ridged and cold. A worker cuts away dead wood, and the sound is small but decisive. The tree must be shaped, not too harshly, not too lazily. Like people, apples resent both neglect and over-management. Specialists still disagree about how much medieval apple cultivation depended on older inherited varieties, and how much came from local seedlings, regional experimentation, and practical selection by unnamed growers. Written records survive unevenly. Some names appear in estate documents, garden lists, and later herbals, but many orchards lived outside careful description. A peasant might know exactly which tree gave the best-keeping fruit, while leaving no written trace at all. History often remembers the scribe and forgets the person with sticky hands and better judgment. Now you follow the apples toward the press in many parts of Western Europe, especially regions such as Normandy, Brittany, and areas of England. Apples became closely tied to cider. The press house is dim, low-roofed, and fragrant. A horse or ox may turn a mill, crushing apples in circular trough. You hear the heavy grind of wood and stone. You hear the wet crackle of fruit breaking open. The smell rises thickly fresh juice, bruised skins, old barrels, yeast, damp straw, and a faint barnyard warmth that no candlelit banquet ever mentions. You place your hand on the side of a barrel. The wood is rough, cool, and slightly sticky near the rim. Juice runs in a cloudy stream into a tub. It is brown gold, foaming lightly, alive with tiny bubbles and fragments of flesh. Fresh cider tastes bright, sweet, and sharp, but it will change. Yeasts will work silently. The drink will ferment, becoming safer to store, easier to transport, and very welcome in a world where plain water is not always trusted. People in medieval Europe did drink water, despite the popular exaggeration that everyone was constantly half drunk. But fermented drinks could be valuable, nourishing, and practical. Also, they made certain conversations with neighbours more tolerable. Cider was not always refined. Some batches were rough. Some were sour. Some could probably remove the pride from a night in 2 cups. But it mattered. It turned apples that were unpleasant to eat into something useful. Bitter and tannic fruit, not very friendly in the hand, could give body and strength to drink. This is one of the apple's quiet tricks. The best fruit for one purpose may be awful for another. A dessert apple wants applause. A cider apple wants patience, pressure, and a barrel. In a village at dusk, you see another side of the orchard's meaning. People gather among bare trees in winter, carrying mugs, lanterns, and bowls. They sing to the apple trees, and they shout blessings. They pour cider near the roots or place soaked bread in the branches. This custom, often called wassailing in parts of England, is a wonderfully odd ritual meant to encourage a good crop and drive away harmful spirits. Imagine being an apple tree and receiving both music and toast. Honestly, there are worse management systems. The night air bites your cheeks. Lantern smoke curls upward. Someone bangs a pot with a spoon, and the sound startles birds from the branches. Children laugh. Adults sing in voices that are not necessarily accurate, but certainly committed. The orchard becomes more than food production. It becomes community theatre, seasonal hope, and agricultural negotiation with the unseen. Medieval life is full of such gestures. People pray, plant, bless, charm, calculate, and hope. Because the harvest remains beyond full control, the apple also slips into medieval medicine and belief. In herbals and household practice, apples may be recommended cooked, combined with spices, used to soothe the stomach, freshen breath, or balance richer foods. Not every remedy is wise by modern standards. Naturally, some are sensible, some are hopeful, Some sound like they were invented by someone staring into a pantry and refusing to admit defeat. Yet the apple's appeal remains steady because it feels gentle. It is familiar. It belongs to the household world, the sick room, the kitchen, the orchard path. You wander through a convent garden in the late afternoon. The atmosphere is quieter here, enclosed and silvery. A nun gathers herbs while another checks young grafts wrapped against wind. Fruit trees near religious houses are not just economic assets. They can offer shade for reading, blossoms for contemplation, and fruit for hospitality. A guest arriving hungry may be given bread, cheese, ale, and apples. Such gifts are small, but in a hard world, small kindness has weight. By the time the evening bell rings, the orchard has darkened, smoke lies low over the village, the press house is closed, but the smell of crushed apples remains in the air, deep and yeasty. Somewhere, barrels are beginning their slow transformation. Somewhere, apples lie in straw, holding their shape against winter. Somewhere, a grafted branch sleeps through frost, waiting for spring without knowing it is part of human hope. You stand at the edge of the manor orchard and listen. Rain taps softly on leaves. A gate creaks. Animals shift in their stalls. The earth is cold beneath your feet, and the air tastes faintly of smoke and fruit. The apple has settled into everyday life, not as a jewel of empire, but as something more intimate: food for the table, drink for the barrel, medicine for the household, rent for the estate, blessing for the village, and labour for hands that know the seasons by touch. In this medieval world, the apple is not glamorous, and that is exactly its strength. It belongs to monks with pruning knives, peasants with baskets, cooks with steaming pots, children with guilty faces, and singers half freezing under winter trees. It survives because people need it, enjoy it, store it, press it, bless it, and argue over it. The fruit has become woven into the fabric of ordinary days, which is where the deepest histories often hide. You board a wooden ship with apples in mind, though the fruit itself does not travel with much dignity. Nothing about an ocean crossing is designed for delicate produce. The deck groans, the ropes strain. Waves slap the hull with a heavy, endless rhythm. Salt spray dries stiff on your sleeves. The air smells of tar, damp timber, bilge water, wool, smoke from the galley, and the sour breath of too many people sharing too little space. Somewhere below, in the dim hold, are barrels, sacks, tools, seed bundles, and the stubborn hopes of people who believe a familiar tree can make a frightening continent feel slightly less enormous. You feel the ship rise and drop beneath your feet. A gull cries behind the stern, then vanishes into grey air. The apples carried across the Atlantic are not only fruit, they are memory packed into seeds and cuttings. They are the taste of home imagined in advance. They are future shade beside a house not yet built, future cider in a barrel not yet made, future pies cooling on windowsills that also do not exist yet. Humans are strange that way. Give them uncertainty, and they start planning dessert. A clear historical fact anchors this scene. European colonists brought domestic apple seeds, grafted trees, and orchard knowledge to North America, where native crabapples already grew, but the familiar cultivated apple had to be introduced and adapted. The colonists arrived with many plants and animals that reshaped landscapes, diets, economies, and relationships with indigenous communities. The apple was part of that larger movement, quiet compared with guns, ships, and livestock, but powerful in its own rooted way. You step ashore into a coastal settlement where the air is colder than expected and full of wet leaves. The ground gives beneath your boots. Smoke rises from rough chimneys. The forest presses close, tall and dark, its trunks crowded in a way that can feel watchful. Axes strike wood with flat, echoing blows. A dog barks. Someone coughs near a doorway. The settlement smells of mud, pine resin, salt marsh, fish, wood smoke, and fear politely disguised as industry. The first years are not romantic. Orchards take time, and hunger does not enjoy waiting. Grain, beans, squash, fish, game, and trade matter more urgently than apple trees. Yet settlers plant seeds because they are thinking beyond the next meal. An apple seed is small enough to travel in a pocket, but it asks for years. It asks for cleared ground, protection from browsing animals, patience through frost, and faith that the seedling will not grow into a tree producing fruit so sour it feels personally offended by your mouth. Many apple trees in colonial North America grew from seed rather than from carefully grafted stock. That matters. Seedling apples are unpredictable. Some are sweet enough to eat fresh. Many are tart, bitter, tough, or oddly flavoured. But a disappointing eating apple can still be useful when pressed into cider, cooked down, fed to animals, dried, or traded. In a raw settlement, usefulness outranks elegance. A fruit does not need to be charming if it can help you survive winter. You walk toward a young orchard fenced with split rails. The fence is rough beneath your hand, splintery and grey. Inside, the trees are small, more promise than shade. Their branches tremble in the wind. Around their bases, weeds compete with shameless enthusiasm. A settler kneels to pack soil around a sapling. His hands are cracked from cold and work. He presses the earth firmly, then pauses, perhaps imagining fruit where now there are only sticks. The scene is quiet, almost tender, except for the mosquito near your ear doing its best to ruin poetry. In New England and other colonial regions, cider soon becomes one of the apple's great uses. Fresh water is available in many places, despite later exaggerations that nobody trusted water at all. But cider offers calories, comfort, storage value, and familiarity. Fermented cider keeps better than fresh juice. It can be made from apples too harsh for eating. It can be shared at meals, sold, traded, and consumed in strengths ranging from mild to very strong. The cider barrel becomes almost as important as the bread oven, which is saying something, because bread has excellent public relations. You enter a colonial press house in autumn. The light is amber and dusty. Apples lie in heaps on the floor, red, green, yellow, brown-spotted, and bruised. Their smell fills the room, sweet, sharp, grassy, yeasty, faintly alcoholic where some have split. A wooden mill crushes them into pulp. You hear the squeal of a peg, the heavy turn of the press screw, the wet collapsing sound of fruit surrendering its juice. Your palms grow sticky. Your boots press into damp straw. A stream of cloudy liquid runs into a waiting tub, foaming softly. Cider is practical, but it also becomes social. Neighbours gather to press apples, share labour, exchange news, and measure one another's harvest with a kind of casual interest that is absolutely judgment. A good orchard can feed a household and impress a community. A poor harvest can darken the year. Apples become part of courtship, hospitality, wages, barter, and local pride. A jug passed from hand to hand carries more than drink. It carries warmth in a cold place, conversation after labour, and the small relief of having produced something from uncertain ground. The apple also becomes a marker of settlement. In some colonies and frontier regions, planting fruit trees helped demonstrate improvement of land. Cleared fields, fences, houses, and orchards signalled that newcomers intended to stay. This was not innocent. Orchards could become living claims laid over lands already known, used, and inhabited by indigenous peoples. You stand at the edge of a clearing and feel the tension in the landscape: felled trees, smoke, fresh stumps, planted saplings, and beyond them, older paths through the forest that do not belong to European maps. Scholars continue to question how varied indigenous responses to introduced apples really were across different nations, regions, and centuries. Some communities adopted orchard fruits into trade and foodways. Others resisted colonial land practices tied to fenced fields and permanent settlement. Many experiences were shaped by diplomacy, violence, exchange, disease, alliance, and displacement. There is no single indigenous reaction to the apple, because there was no single indigenous world. The fruit moved through contact zones where curiosity, coercion, adaptation, and loss existed side by side. You follow a path to a native settlement, where European goods have begun to circulate among local materials. The atmosphere shifts. You smell corn drying, smoke from cooking fires, hides, river mud, and late-season leaves. Apples may appear here through trade, gift, planting, or proximity to colonial farms. A child rolls one in the dirt, examining its colour. An elder cuts a piece and tastes it without revealing much. The fruit is new, but new things do not arrive empty. They arrive tangled with people, power, hunger, and choice. In southern colonies, apples grow alongside different crops and climates. Heat, humidity, pests, and diseases challenge European varieties. Some trees fail, some adapt. Some settlers learn which slopes drain well, which frost pockets to avoid, which apples ripen too early and rot too fast. Farther north and inland, colder winters select for hardy trees. The apple does not conquer the continent neatly. It negotiates with each region, and the regions are tough negotiators. A quirky colonial tidbit is that many apples were known less by polished variety names and more by local reputation, household memory on it, or blunt description. An apple might be called by the name of the farm, the person who grew it, the place it was found, or the reaction it caused. Some seedling apples earned affection, others earned insults. One can imagine a farmer tasting a new fruit, making a face, and giving it a name unfit for a church register. Sadly, not all of those names made it into respectable records, which is a true loss to agricultural comedy. You visit a small farmhouse at dusk. The room is low-ceilinged and smoky. A pot of apples cooks near the hearth, thickening into sauce or apple butter. The smell is warm and spiced with whatever the household can afford. The fire snaps. A child turns slices laid near the heat to dry. The pieces curl at the edges, becoming leathery and sweet. Your fingers touch a slice, still warm, and it bends before tearing. Dried apples can travel, store, and sweeten meals long after the harvest. They are humble, but humility is often just usefulness wearing plain clothes. Apple trees also feed animals, as pigs eat windfalls, or horses nose through fallen fruit. Cattle may be given pomace left from pressing. Nothing is wasted if it can be helped. The orchard supports a household economy in layers fresh fruit for people, cider for storage and trade, vinegar for preservation, pomace for livestock, wood for small uses, blossoms for bees. A tree may seem still, but it participates in many exchanges. You walk beyond the house and hear the autumn orchard settling under a darkening sky. Leaves scrape softly against one another. A barrel hoop creaks in the shed. Somewhere, cider ferments with tiny invisible activity, bubbling under its surface like a secret thought. The air is cool on your face and smells of smoke, wet grass, and crushed fruit. You place your hand against the trunk of a young tree. Its bark is smoother than an old orchard tree's, still tight, still growing into itself. The apple in North America is no longer only a carried memory. It is becoming local, unpredictable, and deeply woven into settlement life. It stands in cleared fields and rough gardens. It fills barrels and kitchens. It crosses cultural boundaries unevenly. It supports claims, meals, trade, and comfort. It belongs to labour more than luxury, to to weather more than theory, to households trying to make permanence out of uncertainty. As night lowers, the settlement becomes a scatter of candlelight under immense trees. The forest smells damp and alive beyond the clearing. The planted apple sapling stands small against that vastness, almost fragile, almost foolish. Yet their roots grip the soil. Their buds wait through cold. Their seeds promise surprise. In a world where so much feels unfinished, the apple offers a slow kind of confidence, not loud, not certain, just rooted enough to say, stay, tend, harvest, and see what grows. You meet him not as a cartoon, not as a smiling figure from a schoolroom poster, but as a thin, weathered man moving along a rough frontier path with a sack of apple seeds over one shoulder. His clothes are plain, patched, and dusty. His feet may be bare, or nearly so, hardened by miles of mud, frost, roots, and stones. The air smells of wet leaves, wood smoke, horse sweat, and river fog. Somewhere, a woodpecker taps against a dead trunk. Somewhere farther off, an axe strikes, pauses, then strikes again. You are in the early United States, in the restless lands beyond the older coastal towns, where settlement pushes westward through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and neighbouring regions. The forest is dense, not empty, not silent, not waiting politely for fences. It is full of older paths, native communities, animals, creeks, thickets, and trees so large they make human ambition look like a candle held under the moon. Yet settlers keep coming, with wagons, children, tools, debts, land claims, hunger, and the usual human talent for insisting that hardship will somehow become opportunity if you just keep walking. The man beside you is John Chapman, remembered as Johnny Appleseed. A mainstream historical fact is that he was a real person, born in Massachusetts in 1774, and he became known for planting apple nurseries across parts of the American frontier. He did not simply wander about tossing seeds at random while birds sang backup vocals. As charming as that picture may be, his work was more deliberate. He planted nurseries, fenced or marked them, returned to tend them, and sold or gave young trees to settlers. The legend is soft and glowing. The real work was muddy, strategic, and rather more impressive. You follow him down a narrow track where leaves slap gently against your sleeves. The soil is dark and damp. Your fingers brush the rough bark of saplings crowding the path. Chapman walks lightly, though the sack of seeds shifts with a dry whisper at his side. The sound is small, almost like rain inside cloth. Each seed is a possibility, and also a gamble. Seed-grown apple trees do not promise sweet-eating fruit. Many will grow apples too sour, bitter, or small to enjoy fresh. But on the frontier that is not failure. That is cider vinegar, animal feed, preserves, and trade. Practicality, as ever, has a very broad definition of success. You come to a clearing where the stumps are new. The smell of cut wood is strong, green, and raw. Smoke rises from a cabin chimney. Chickens scratch in damp leaves. A woman stands near the doorway, arms folded, watching Chapman with guarded curiosity. Children peek from behind her skirt, the oldest trying to look unimpressed and failing. Chapman speaks gently, perhaps offering news from settlements miles away, perhaps asking about weather, perhaps discussing seedlings. He knows that people want trees not because apples are romantic, but because a tree can turn claimed land into lived land. In some frontier areas, laws and customs rewarded evidence of improvement clearing, fencing, building, planting. Fruit trees helped signal permanence. An orchard suggested that a family intended to stay long enough for roots to matter. Chapman understood this demand. He moved ahead of settlement lines, planted nurseries where settlers were likely to arrive, and created a living supply of young trees. This makes him less like a dreamy saint of apples, and a more like a travelling businessman with dirt under his nails and a very unusual marketing department, namely himself. Yet business alone does not explain him. You walk with him at dusk as mist gathers low over the ground. The air cools. Your hands grow stiff. He carries religious writings and speaks of spiritual matters with the seriousness of a person who sees the world as full of signs. Chapman followed the teachings of the new church, inspired by the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg. He shared religious tracts as he travelled, sometimes dividing pamphlets and leaving portions with different families. Imagine receiving half a religious booklet from a wandering apple planter and being told the other half might appear later. Frontier suspense, but make it theological. A quirky tidbit clings to his image, the famous cooking pot hat. Tradition often pictures him wearing a tin pot on his head, both as hat and cookware. It is wonderfully memorable, and just odd enough to survive in folklore. Whether he truly did this regularly is uncertain. Some stories describe him with unusual clothing and simple gear, but the pot hat may have grown larger in the telling, as legends tend to do when left alone in a room with children and patriotic illustrators. Still, the image captures something real about him. He lived lightly, carried little, and seemed almost proud of discomfort. You sit near a small fire where apples roast in the ashes. The night smells of smoke, damp wool, and sweet fruit splitting in the heat. The skin wrinkles and darkens. Juice hisses where it touches the coals. Chapman's voice is low, calm, and a little strange, full of scripture, weather, orchard talk, and moral concern for animals. Stories about him often describe unusual kindness toward creatures. He's said to have avoided harming insects and animals when possible. Some accounts are surely polished by memory, but they agree on the impression he made gentle, eccentric, stubborn, and difficult to fit neatly into ordinary categories. History does enjoy a person who refuses to sit in the proper chair. You take a roasted apple wrapped in a scrap of cloth. It is hot against your palms. The flesh inside has softened into sweetness and smoke. As you eat, you hear the forest creak beyond the firelight. An owl calls once. The darkness between the trees feels thick and watchful. Chapman appears comfortable in it. He sleeps outdoors, in cabins, in barns, wherever the road and kindness allow. He moves through weather that would make most people reconsider their life choices by breakfast. Historians still argue whether Chapman should be understood mainly as a religious wanderer, a frontier entrepreneur, a conservation-minded eccentric, or a symbolic figure later shaped to soothe the rougher memories of expansion. Each version catches part of him, but none holds him completely. He sold trees, yet he also gave them away. He lived simply, yet understood land value. He preached peace, yet moved through a world marked by conflict, displacement, and uneasy settlement. He loved apples, though not necessarily the sweet, polished fruit that later generations imagine. The apple seedlings he planted were often destined for cider rather than fresh eating. This is important, because the innocent image of Johnny Appleseed handing out lunchbox apples misses the sharper taste of his world. Many frontier apples were pressed into alcoholic cider. Cider could be safer to store than fresh juice, easier to trade, and useful in the households where sugar was limited. The apples themselves might be small, hard, or mouth-puckering. A child expecting modern sweetness would be deeply betrayed. A cider maker, however, might nod with respect. You watch Chapman kneel at the edge of a nursery plot. The soil is loose and cold. He presses seeds into furrows with careful fingers, then covers them lightly. Nearby, a crude fence keeps out livestock and deer, at least in theory. Deer, like goats, seem to view fences as philosophical suggestions. He marks the place, perhaps planning to return when the seedlings are ready to sell or transplant. The atmosphere is quiet except for the wind combing through dry grass and the faint creak of branches. In spring, these nurseries become soft green promises. Tiny leaves unfold, Rain beads on them. The smell of wet earth rises clean and mineral in summer. Weeds crowd in and must be pulled. In autumn, the seedlings harden. In winter, they stand as thin switches against snow. Chapman's work is not one shining gesture, but repetition. Plant, protect, return, bargain, preach, walk, and plant again. The legend makes him float. The labour makes him human. You pass a settlement where people know him by reputation. Some welcome him warmly. Others think him odd, perhaps too odd, which is quite a statement in a frontier world where everyone is improvising civilization with axes and borrowed nails. He brings news, seeds, trees, and religious talk. Children may find him fascinating. Adults may find him useful. Dogs may find him suspicious until proven otherwise. He exists in that social space reserved for wanderers who are both familiar and never entirely settled. His legacy grows because it satisfies many needs. Americans later turn him into a gentlefolk hero, humble, generous, close to nature, spreading fruit instead of violence. That version is comforting. It gives expansion a softer symbol, a man planting trees rather than taking land. But you can feel the more complicated truth beneath your boots. Every nursery exists within a changing landscape. Every orchard belongs to questions of ownership, settlement, and transformation. Chapman's trees helped families survive and helped communities take root, but they also participated in the remaking of land already inhabited and understood by others. Still, the man himself remains difficult to dismiss. You see him walking at the edge of morning, his figure small against a pale sky. Frost silvers the grass. The sack at his shoulder is nearly empty now. His breath shows faintly in the air. Birds begin to call from bare branches. He pauses beside a stream, kneels, and drinks from his cupped hands. The water is icy. You can almost feel the sting of it in your palms. Then he rises and continues, not grandly, not theatrically, just moving on. By the time his life ends in the 19th century, the stories are already growing around him like vines. Some are true, some are embroidered, some are too good not to repeat, which is the most dangerous category. The real John Chapman becomes Johnny Appleseed, and Johnny Appleseed becomes a figure children can carry in memory, a strange, kindly planter walking through wild country with seeds, faith, and a talent for appearing just where orchards might soon be wanted. You stand beside one of his young apple trees in a clearing washed with late light. Its branches are thin, its leaves trembling. It does not know it is part of a legend. It only knows soil, rain, sun, insects, and the slow pressure of growth. One day, its fruit may be sharp enough to make a grown person blink. One day, it may be pressed into cider, boiled into sauce, fed to pigs, or planted again through seed. That is the quieter truth beneath the folklore. Chapman did not spread perfection. He spread possibility. The wind moves through the saplings with a soft, papery sound. Smoke from a cabin drifts low across the field. Somewhere, a child laughs. Somewhere, a barrel waits. The frontier evening smells of earth, leaves, ash, and unripe fruit. You feel the rough fence rail under your hand and the chill settling into your coat. The apple has found a peculiar messenger, not polished, not simple, not entirely knowable. And through him, the fruit becomes part of a national dream, half practical, half mythical, rooted in mud, wrapped in kindness, and sharpened by the taste of cider apples under a wide, unsettled sky. You step into an orchard where patience has learned to carry a notebook. The trees still breathe in wind and weather, still answer to frost, rain, insects, and soil. But now human beings are watching them with sharper eyes. You hear the scratch of a pen, the snip of pruning shears, the dull thud of boots in damp earth. The air smells of cut twigs, leaf mould, wet wool, and the faint green bitterness that rises when living bark is opened. Somewhere nearby, a gardener mutters to himself, which is how many scientific revolutions begin. Honestly, you're in the age when the apple becomes a subject of study as much as a source of food. Growers compare trees, gardeners exchange scions, nurserymen print catalogues, landowners request fashionable varieties, farmers test which apples survive local winters, resist disease, ripen late or keep longest in storage. The orchard is turning into a living laboratory, though still one with mud, ladders, bees, and the occasional pig trying to participate without qualifications. A clear historical fact anchors this world by the 18th and 19th centuries. Pomology, the study and cultivation of fruit, became increasingly organized in Europe and North America. Pomological societies, nursery catalogues, agricultural fairs, and illustrated manuals helped identify, describe, name, and distribute apple varieties. People began treating apples not only as local favourites, but as specimens to be classified, compared, improved, and sold across wider regions. You walk beside a row of young grafted trees. Their trunks are straight, their branches trained outward to catch light. Labels hang from twine names written in ink, some fading, some newly tied. The labels click softly when the wind moves through them. Your fingers touch one tag, smooth on one side, rough where weather has lifted the grain. The names feel almost like characters in a village register. Ribston Pippin, Golden Russet, Northern Spy, Gravenstein, Cox's Orange Pippin. Some sound noble, some sound cosy, some sound like they might refuse to speak to one another at dinner. Grafting remains the key to this new order. A seed can produce surprise, but a graft can preserve identity. You watch a skilled worker slice a scion from a valued tree. The knife moves cleanly, revealing pale, moist wood beneath the bark. The cut surface gleams for a moment in the cool air. The worker fits it against a rootstock, binds it tightly, and seals the wound. It is a quiet act of trust. Two pieces of living plant must accept one another. If they do, the roots will feed a branch that carries the memory of another tree. The rootstock itself becomes a subject of attention. Tree is not only its fruiting wood, its roots shape its size, vigour, hardiness, and sometimes its resistance to pests and difficult soil. Growers learn that a vigorous rootstock may produce a large tree, slow to bear but long-lived, while a weaker or dwarfing rootstock may produce a smaller tree that fruits sooner and fits tighter spaces. The idea is simple once explained, but it changes orchard design. You can almost hear future orchards becoming more compact, more calculated, less like scattered giants and more like trained citizens. You pass into a nursery yard where rows of saplings stretch across the slope. The soil is dark and newly worked. Rain has left small beads on leaves. Men and women move between rows with baskets, knives, stakes, and bundles of young trees wrapped at the roots. A dog sleeps under a cart with absolute confidence that commerce can proceed without him. Customers arrive with lists, asking which apples keep until spring, which make good sauce, which ripen early, which sell well at market. The nurseryman answers with the calm authority of someone who knows he will still blame the weather if anything goes wrong. Printed catalogues spread this authority. You hold one in your hands, its pages slightly rough, smelling of paper, ink, and dust. Each variety is described in compact language size, colour, season, flavour, use, origin, habit of tree. Some descriptions are precise, others are cheerfully optimistic, because salesmanship and horticulture have been sharing a fence for a long time. A variety may be called excellent, superior, handsome, esteemed, or indispensable. One suspects that a few merely adequate apples received very fine introductions. The classification of apples becomes almost a passion. Pomologists compare shape, stem cavity, skin texture, russeting, flesh colour, ripening time, and flavour. They cut fruit open and examine the core. They note whether the flesh is tender, crisp, juicy, coarse, aromatic, acid, sweet, or subacid. You sit at a long table where apples are arranged in careful rows. The room smells delicious and faintly overwhelming, a heavy perfume of sugar, acid, waxy skins, and old wood, knives, tap, plates. People taste, pause, frown, nod, and write. It is a tasting, but with homework. A quirky tidbit from this world is the obsession with apple illustrations. Before colour photography could reliably capture subtle differences, artists painted fruit with astonishing care for horticultural records. Some apples were shown with slices, seeds, stems, and blemishes, each one recorded like a portrait subject trying very hard to look important. These paintings could be scientifically useful, but they are also strangely charming. Imagine sitting for a portrait and discovering the apple has a better likeness than the family patriarch. History is not always fair. You examine one such illustration beneath a window. The painted apple glows yellow-green with red streaks and little speckles. Beside it, a cut half reveals cream-coloured flesh and dark seeds. The page feels smooth under your hand. Outside, rain taps against the glass. Inside, the painted fruit refuses to rot. That is part of the scientific dream, to hold the temporary still long enough to compare it, teach it, sell it, and remember it. Yet the living orchard resists full control. A late frost can blacken blossom. Scab can mark leaves and fruit. Insects can tunnel through flesh. Fireblight can wither shoots as if flame has passed invisibly along the branch. You walk through an experimental plot after rain, and the atmosphere is heavy, wet, and uneasy. Leaves cling to your sleeves. The smell of damp vegetation is thick. A grower lifts a spotted apple and sighs. Science may improve the odds, but weather still has a dramatic personality. Researchers and practical growers begin testing sprays, pruning methods, spacing, soil treatments, and storage techniques. Some methods will later be rejected as harmful or ineffective. Others become standard practice. Orcharding is full of trial and error, which is a polite way of saying that many trees suffer through human confidence. Still, knowledge accumulates. Growers learn which varieties need pollination partners, which bloom too early for frost-prone valleys, which bear heavily one year and sulk the next, which store well in cool cellars, and which collapse into mealiness if asked to behave beyond their nature. Historians still debate how much apple improvement came from deliberate scientific breeding and how much came from chance seedlings discovered by farmers, nursery workers, and ordinary households. The named variety often begins as an accident, a seedling in a hedge, a tree near a farmhouse, a fruit noticed because it tastes better, keeps longer, or looks handsome. Science then steps in to describe, propagate, and distribute it. In that sense, the orchard is both laboratory and lottery. People study the apple carefully, but the apple keeps slipping little surprises into the system. You stand in a storage cellar where apples are being tested for keeping quality. The room is cool, with a mineral dampness in the walls and straw underfoot. Shelves hold fruit separated by variety. Some remain firm and bright, others wrinkle, soften, or give off the sour smell of decay. The silence is broken by the occasional tiny tick of settling wood. Your hand closes around a late-keeping apple, cold and hard as a small stone. It does not release much scent until cut. Then a clean, sharp fragrance appears, bright as winter sunlight. Storage changes value. An apple that tastes wonderful for 1 week may be less useful than one that remains decent for months. Commercial growers care about timing, transport, and reliability. Households care about having fruit in the hungry gap. A keeper apple is not always glamorous. It may seem stern at harvest, improving only after weeks in storage. Some apples need time, which is an irritating but respectable trait. You visit an agricultural fair where apples compete for attention beneath canvas tents. The atmosphere is lively but not frantic. You hear horses snorting, wheels grinding over packed dirt, people bargaining, children laughing, judges clearing their throats with unnecessary importance. Tables display polished fruit in pyramids and rows. Cards name each variety. Ribbons lie ready for winners. The apples smell sweet under the tent, warmed slightly by the afternoon. Growers lean close to inspect rivals' entries, pretending politeness while committing quiet acts of evaluation. These fairs spread reputation. A prize can lift a variety into demand. A nursery can advertise awards. Farmers can compare notes with others from different soils and climates. The apple becomes part of a wider public conversation about improvement, progress, and taste. It is no longer enough for a tree to bear fruit. The fruit must be named, judged, ranked, shipped, stored, and described. Poor apple. It thought growing was enough. You move toward a small experimental orchard at twilight. Young trees stand in measured rows. Stakes mark trials. A notebook rests on a crate, its pages weighted by a stone. The sky is pale lavender. The air cools against your face, carrying the smell of grass, bark, and distant smoke. You hear a soft rustle as a rabbit slips under the fence, already planning unauthorized research. The apple has entered an age of systems. Grafting preserves identity. Rootstocks shape growth. Catalogues spread desire. Illustrations preserve appearance. Societies define excellence. Experiments test survival. Storage extends usefulness. Classification turns local fruit into shared knowledge. The orchard is still alive, still uncertain, still vulnerable, but it is no longer merely tended by habit. It is studied. You rest your hand on the trunk of a grafted tree. The bark is cool, faintly ridged, and damp from evening mist. Somewhere under the soil, roots draw water in darkness. Somewhere above, buds form with quiet precision. Human beings have named this tree, pruned it, trained it, catalogued it, and perhaps expected too much from it. The tree answers in its own time: blossom, leaf, fruit, rest. The rhythm remains older than any notebook, and in the calm of the ordered orchard, you feel the strange partnership at the heart of apple history. People try to tame the fruit with knives, labels, charts, and careful hands. The apple accepts some of this guidance, rejects some, and quietly produces another generation of mysteries. Science does not end wonder here. It gives wonder better handwriting. You enter the industrial apple age through the back of a market hall at dawn, where wagons rattle over stone and the fruit no longer belongs only to one household, one village, or one beloved tree at the edge of a field. Apples arrive in crates, barrels, basket, and boxes, stacked shoulder-high beneath iron beams beaded with condensation. The air is cold enough to sting your fingers. It smells of straw, sawdust, horse manure, coal smoke, wet wool, and thousands of apples breathing out their faint, sweet perfume together. You hear men shouting prices. You hear wheels grinding, crates scraping, paper rustling, and the sharp crack of a wooden box being pried open. A clerk licks a pencil and marks numbers in a ledger. Nearby, a buyer lifts an apple, turns it under the pale light, checks its skin, presses gently near the stem, and makes the tiny frown of someone about to negotiate very seriously over a piece of fruit. The apple has entered commerce at scale, and commerce has no time for sentiment unless sentiment improves the price. A mainstream historical fact stands firmly here during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Railroads, steamships, refrigerated storage, improved packaging, and expanding urban markets transformed apples into a major commercial crop. Growers could ship fruit farther than local roads allowed. Cities could receive fresh produce from distant orchards. Apples became more standardized, more branded, more sorted by grade, and more dependent on networks of transport and distribution. The orchard was still rooted in soil, but its future increasingly ran on timetables. You follow a crate from a rural packing shed toward a railway platform. The shed smells of pine boards, apple skins, dust, and lamp oil. Workers sort fruit at long tables, hands moving quickly. Good apples roll one way, bruised fruit goes another. Small, misshapen apples are set aside for pressing, drying, or cooking. The best are wrapped, packed, and labelled. You touch the wood shavings inside a crate. They feel dry and springy, designed to cushion the journey. An apple nestled there is no longer just harvest. It is inventory. The railroad platform trembles as a train approaches. Black smoke pours upward and drifts across the sky. The locomotive exhales steam with a hot metallic hiss. Your coat catches the smell of coal, grease, and cold iron. Men load crates into freight cars, stacking them carefully but quickly. Apples travel toward these city markets, grocery stalls, hotels, restaurants, boarding houses, and factory districts. A fruit that once waited quietly in a cellar now races across landscapes behind a roaring engine. Not exactly relaxing for the apple, but very good for business. In cities, apples become everyday portable food. You walk along a street where factory whistles blow and crowds move beneath grey morning light. A worker buys an apple from a cart and slips it into a lunch pail beside bread, cheese, or a piece of meat. A schoolchild tucks one into a satchel. A clerk eats one standing near a window during a short break, its skin snapping under his teeth. The apple fits modern life because it is self-contained. No bowl required, no knife required, unless one is feeling fancy. Nature, for once, has provided packaging. Street vendors know this well. Their carts brighten the pavement with red, yellow, and green fruit. The apples are polished with cloth until they catch the light, because people trust shine more than they probably should. You hear a vendor call out in a voice roughened by cold air. The cartwheels squeak. Rainwater runs in the gutter. When you pick up an apple, its skin is cool and smooth, slightly damp from mist. You bite, and the sound is crisp enough to cut through traffic. Hoofbeats, and the low rumble of the city. Yet the industrial apple is not only fresh, it enters factories. You step into a canning room where steam clouds the windows and women work in rows, peeling, coring, slicing, and packing fruit into tins and jars. The air is warm, wet, and heavy with cooked sweetness. Machines clatter, belts turn, knives flash, syrup glistens under lamplight. Your hands would grow sticky here within a minute. Apples become sauce, butter, jelly, pie filling, dried rings, vinegar, juice, and cider. The fruit is broken apart so it can travel farther, last longer, and fit the shelves of a new food economy. The factory changes the sound of apple history. Instead of bees in blossom, you hear gears and pulleys. Instead of a hand press groaning in a farm shed, you hear industrial rollers and pumps. This does not erase the orchard, but it stretches the apple into new forms. A child in a city may taste applesauce from a jar without knowing the tree, the harvest weather, or the hands that sorted the fruit. Convenience is a powerful magician. It makes labour vanish, then charges extra for the trick. A quirky tidbit from this period is the rise of elaborate fruit crate labels, especially in regions where growers shipped apples over long distances. These labels often showed mountain views, cheerful children, elegant women, heroic landscapes, or apples so perfect they looked less grown than personally blessed by sunlight. The label sold not just fruit, but freshness, purity, region, and trust. Some crate art became so colourful that the box looked more dramatic than the apple inside. Advertising has always known how to put a hat on reality. You pause in a packing house where bright paper labels are stacked near a workbench. The ink smells sharp and new, One label shows snow-covered peaks behind a basket of red apples. Another shows a smiling child holding fruit with suspiciously clean hands. The paper feels smooth beneath your thumb. These images attach place to produce. An apple from a distant valley becomes a promised clean air, rich soil, wholesome farms, honest labour. Whether every grower lived up to the artwork is, naturally, a separate and quieter matter. Commercial orchards begin favouring varieties that can survive shipment, store well, look attractive, and ripen in predictable ways. Taste still matters, but the market asks other questions too. Will it bruise easily? Will the skin colour appeal to buyers? Will it fit neatly in a box? Will it arrive firm after days or weeks in transit? Some older local apples lose ground because they are too tender, too irregular, too obscure, or too poorly behaved for large-scale shipping. The industrial age prefers fruit that can follow instructions. Specialists continue to debate whether standardization improved apples for most consumers or narrowed the experience of flavour by pushing countless regional varieties aside. Both arguments carry weight. Commercial systems made apples more widely available, often at lower cost and in better condition. But they also favoured a smaller set of durable, attractive varieties. The marketplace can be generous, but it can also be a picky little tyrant with a clipboard. You walk through a cold storage warehouse, where the atmosphere is dim and strangely still. The air bites your nose. Walls sweat faintly. Rows of crates disappear into shadow. Mechanical refrigeration and controlled storage gradually change the seasonality of apples, allowing fruit to be held longer and sold months from harvest. You place your palm against a crate and feel cold seep into your skin. Inside, apples wait in suspended time, slowed but not immortal. Their scent is muted, crisp, and faintly floral. Like autumn trapped under glass, this ability to store and ship fruit encourages distant regions to specialize. In North America, places such as Washington State, New York, Michigan, and parts of Canada build strong apple industries. In Europe, established growing regions adapt to modern trade. In the Southern Hemisphere, countries eventually send apples northward during opposite seasons, turning the fruit into an almost year-round expectation. The apple becomes global not because it forgets seasons, but because commerce learns how to chase them around the planet. The industrial age also changes the orchard itself. Large plantings become more organised, with rows designed for pruning, spraying, picking, and hauling. Ladders lean against trees. Sprayers coat leaves to fight pests and diseases. Teams of pickers move through harvest with sacks strapped against their bodies. You feel the weight of one of those picking bags tug against your shoulders, the canvas rough across your chest. Each apple must be twisted free without bruising. The work is repetitive, careful, and tiring. A perfect apple on a shop counter carries invisible aches in it. Migrant labour becomes essential in many commercial growing regions. Workers follow harvests, often living with uncertainty, poor pay, and little public attention. Their hands make abundance possible. You stand in an orchard at noon, sun warm on your neck, dust rising between rows. The smell of leaves and ripe fruit thick in the air. The picker reaches into the canopy and fills a bag with swift precision. The apples thump softly against one another, far away. An advertisement may speak of wholesome simplicity. Here, the simplicity has sore muscles. Marketing wraps the apple in moral brightness. It becomes a symbol of health, cleanliness, childhood, and common sense. Posters and slogans encourage people to eat apples daily. Schoolrooms, lunch counters, grocers, and magazines all help polish the fruit's public image. The apple is no longer only something to eat. It is something that says you are sensible, wholesome, perhaps even virtuous, which is a lot of pressure for a snack. You enter a grocery store in the early 20th century. Electric lights glow overhead. Wooden bins hold carefully stacked apples, their skins shining red and gold. The floor smells of sawdust, coffee, onions, paper bags, and citrus peel. A grocer weighs fruit on a metal scale, the pointer trembling before it settles. A customer chooses by colour first, then firmness. The apple has become a democratic luxury, modest enough for lunch, bright enough for display, and sturdy enough to survive the trip home in a paper sack. Still, beneath the polish, the fruit remains alive to decay. One bruised apple can spoil others nearby. One hidden rot can turn profit into loss. Sorting rooms, warehouses, inspectors, and grocers all fight against softness, mould, and time. Industrial systems may seem powerful, but the apple keeps its old reminder close. Flesh changes. Sugar ferments, skin wrinkles. Nothing stays crisp forever, not even progress, despite its confident brochures. At the end of the market day, the hall grows quieter, the shouting fades. Straw litters the floor. A few damaged apples lie beneath a table, sweetening the air as they soften. Outside, the last carts roll away, and city lights blink on through the mist. You hold one polished apple in your hand, feeling its cool curve, its firmness, its practiced beauty. It has passed through orchard labour, sorting tables, freight schedules, storage rooms, advertising promises, and the restless appetite of cities. The industrial apple is both ordinary and astonishing. It rides trains, fills lunch pails, feeds factories, decorates labels, and waits beneath electric lights. It gains reach and loses some wildness. It becomes cleaner, brighter, more reliable, and maybe a little less surprising. Yet when you bite it, the sound is still immediate, still human, still satisfying in a way no ledger can fully explain. Beneath the market noise and machinery, the apple remains what it has always been, sweetness wrapped around seeds, travelling by whatever road the age provides. You enter a room where the apple no longer needs roots to travel. It has learned to move through paintings, proverbia, schoolrooms, advertisements, fairy tales, medical advice, religious imagination, and the bright little theatre of a grocery display. The fruit sits in a bowl on a wooden table, polished and quiet, but around it gathers a whole crowd of meanings. You smell beeswax from the table, paper from old books, dust warmed by lamplight, and the clean, sharp scent released when someone cuts an apple with a small knife. The blade taps the plate. The peel curls in one red ribbon. The room feels hushed, as if even ordinary fruit knows when it has become symbolic. You pick up the apple and feel its cool skin against your palm. It is smooth, nearly weightless compared with all the stories placed upon it. Somehow, this small round fruit is asked to represent temptation, health, innocence, danger, beauty, knowledge, national pride, childhood, and moral discipline. That is quite a workload for something that bruises if dropped. Yet the apple accepts the assignment because human beings love objects that are simple enough to hold and flexible enough to explain everything. A mainstream historical fact belongs here, the famous phrase "an apple. A day keeps the doctor away" grew from 19th century proverbial health advice and became widely popular through later public use, advertising, and nutritional messaging. Apples do contain fibre, water, vitamins, and beneficial plant compounds, though eating one daily is not a magical force field against illness. Still, the phrase works because it is rhythmic, memorable, and comforting. It makes health feel less like a frightening medical system and more like a small red fruit waiting politely on the kitchen counter. You step into a Victorian kitchen where the proverb feels at home. The stove radiates heat. The air smells of coal smoke, boiled tea, drying laundry, and apples simmering with a little sugar. A mother slices fruit into a basin while a child watches, chin just level with the table edge. The slices land with soft wet sounds. Health, here, is domestic. It is warm food, regular habits, clean hands, brisk walks, and stern advice delivered by people who may or may not follow it themselves. The apple becomes part of this moral household world, simple, wholesome, inexpensive, and gently bossy. Medicine gives the apple a softer authority than myth does. Doctors, diet reformers, teachers, and public health voices use it as a friendly symbol of prevention. It is not exotic. It is not frightening. It does not require Latin, although someone will always try to add Latin because history has a weakness for making things sound more official. The apple becomes the fruit of sensible living. You wash it under cold water, feel the skin squeak beneath your fingers, and hear the bright snap of the first bite. The act feels clean, almost virtuous, which is impressive for something that may have spent an hour rolling around in a satchel. You move from kitchen to church window, from household medicine to sacred imagination. In many Western artworks, the forbidden fruit in Eden appears as an apple, though the biblical text does not name the fruit. That detail matters. The apple became attached to the story through layers of language, art, teaching, and imagination. Its shape was easy to paint, its colour was vivid, its sweetness suggested desire. Its ordinariness made temptation feel close to home. A strange fruit in a distant garden is one thing. An apple on your table is much more unsettling. Researchers continue to debate how strongly the apple's Eden identity was shaped by Latin wordplay, since malum can be linked with both apple and evil, and how much came from medieval and Renaissance art choosing a familiar fruit for a powerful story. The answer is probably tangled, like most things involving language, religion, and artists with strong opinions about red pigment. You stand beneath stained glass and watch coloured light fall across stone. In the image above you, a hand reaches toward a fruit. The apple gleams with danger, yet it looks almost tender. This is the apple's genius as symbol. It can be innocent and suspicious at the same time. It appears in fairy tales as nourishment and threat. Think of the poisoned apple offered in stories of beauty, jealousy, and sleep. The fruit is lovely because danger often wears good lighting. You enter a dark cottage where a fire burns low and shadows breathe against the walls. An apple rests in a stranger's hand, shining red against wrinkled fingers. You smell smoke, dried herbs, and damp wool. The fruit looks delicious. That is the problem, naturally. A dangerous turnip would never have achieved the same career. A quirky tidbit hides in plain sight on your own body. The Adam's apple, the bump of cartilage at the throat, carries a name linked to old stories that a piece of forbidden fruit stuck in Adam's throat. Anatomically, that is not what happened, but folklore rarely waits for medical review. The name survived because it is vivid, slightly ridiculous, and easy to remember. The apple climbs from orchard to myth, then somehow ends up in the vocabulary of the human neck. You have to admire the range. You step into a schoolroom where the apple becomes a gift. Wooden desks stand in rows. Chalk dust floats in the air. You smell slate, ink, damp coats, and lunch pails. A bright apple sits on the teacher's desk, polished until it almost glows. The gesture of giving apples to teachers grew from practical rural habits, and later sentimental imagery. In places where teachers were poorly paid or boarded with families, gifts of food could matter. Over time, the apple became an emblem of school itself. Obedience, gratitude, learning, and perhaps a small attempt to influence grading, purely in the spirit of scholarship. Of course, the apple suits education because it suggests knowledge without looking severe. Books can intimidate. Exams can terrify. An apple just sits there, round and calm, pretending not to know how many children are unprepared for arithmetic. In posters and classroom decorations, it becomes bright shorthand for learning. You hear the scratch of chalk, the shuffle of paper, the creak of benches. The apple's red skin catches the window light like a tiny flag of good behaviour. Then marketing takes the fruit and polishes it even harder. You walk into a 20th century advertising office where the air smells of cigarettes, ink, hot metal, and paper fresh from the press. Men and women study layouts showing shining apples beside smiling faces, lunch boxes, doctors, mothers, athletes, and children with suspiciously perfect teeth. The apple is sold as freshness, health, modern convenience, rural purity, and family care. It is never just fruit for sale. It is reassurance by the pound. Growers' associations and public campaigns encourage apple consumption during times of surplus, economic stress, or shifting diets. Bright slogans and displays help move harvests from orchards into urban homes. The apple's image becomes cleaner than the work behind it. You see a poster of a spotless child biting a flawless red apple, while the real storage room smells of straw, cold wood, and fruit that must be checked constantly for rot. Marketing does not lie every time, but it does have a talent for turning difficulty slightly away from the camera. The apple also becomes national. Different countries and regions adopt beloved varieties as local pride. A particular apple may stand for a valley, a county, a state, an island, a climate, or a memory of grandparents' gardens. You visit a harvest festival where the air smells of hay, fried dough, cider, and wet leaves. Brass music plays a little off-key in the distance. People crowd around tables of pies, caramel apples, apple butter, and baskets labelled with variety names. Children carry sticky treats on sticks. Adults discuss flavour with the seriousness normally reserved for politics, though with slightly better snacks. Caramel and candy apples add another layer of performance. The fruit is dipped, coated, glazed, and turned into fairground brightness. Your fingers stick to the paper wrapper. The sugar shell cracks under your teeth before you reach the tart flesh beneath. It is wholesome fruit wearing a carnival costume. There is something wonderfully human about taking a symbol of health and covering it in sugar, then calling it seasonal tradition. The apple does not object. It has survived worse interpretations. You drift into the world of famous apples, the apple of discord in myth, the apple on a teacher's desk, the apple that falls near a thinking scientist, the apple in fairy tales, the apple in health slogans. Some are literal, some are embroidered, some are symbolic shorthand. The story of Isaac Newton watching an apple fall, for example, became one of the most famous images in the history of science. Whether every detail in popular retellings is tidy is another matter. The falling apple endures because it makes gravity visible, sudden and almost intimate. The universe gives a lesson by dropping fruit, very efficient. By evening, you're back at a simple table with a bowl of apples in the centre. Outside, rain taps softly on the window. The room smells of tea, paper, and cut fruit browning gently on a plate. You touch the exposed flesh and feel how quickly it changes in air. Even symbols oxidize, which feels rude but honest. The apple's meanings are not fixed. They darken, brighten, shift, and sweeten depending on who holds them. You understand now why this fruit became so powerful in the imagination. It is common but beautiful. Sweet but sometimes sharp. Healthy but easily turned into candy. Innocent but perfect for temptation. Local but global. Ordinary enough for a lunchbox. Dramatic enough for a myth. The apple is a mirror with a stem. People look at it and see what they need: knowledge, danger, comfort, discipline, memory, home, desire, or a very persuasive advertisement. The knife rests beside the plate. The peel curls like a red question mark. You lift one slice and taste it slowly. It is crisp, cool, and faintly floral, with a tartness that wakes the mouth before fading into sweetness. Around you, the stories settle like dust in warm light. The apple does not explain itself. It simply waits, shining quietly, while humans continue to make it mean far more than fruit ever promised. You step into an orchard that feels both ancient and strangely new. The trees stand in rows beneath a pale morning sky, their branches lifted like quiet questions. The grass is wet against your shoes. Bees move between blossoms with soft, busy murmurs. Somewhere, a tractor starts, coughs, settles, then hums along the edge of the field. The air smells of damp soil, diesel, petals, and the faint mineral cold that lingers when spring has arrived but does not yet fully trust itself. This is the modern apple world, and it is not as simple as a bright bin of fruit beneath grocery lights. It is science and weather, memory and money, fragile blossoms and global supply chains, lost varieties and new patents, old orchards and genetic laboratories. You walk between trees supported by trellises and wires, their branches trained at careful angles. The trunks are slimmer than the broad old orchard trees people often imagine. The fruiting wood is managed so pickers can reach more apples from the ground, because ladders are romantic only to people not falling from them. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Modern commercial apple production often depends on high-density orchards, dwarfing rootstocks, irrigation, pest management, cold storage, controlled atmosphere storage, and carefully chosen varieties bred or selected for flavour. Appearance, yield, disease resistance, and shelf life. The apple has become a crop of precision. Water is measured, bloom time is monitored, soil nutrients are tested, fruit firmness is checked, harvest dates are calculated with a seriousness that would impress an astronomer, or at least a very anxious lunchbox. You pause beside a row of young trees covered in blossom. The petals are white with a blush of pink, soft as breath when you touch one. A bee lands near your knuckle, delicate legs dusted with pollen. You hear its wings vibrate, barely louder than a thought. Pollination is still one of the orchard's delicate hinges. Many apple varieties need pollen from compatible partners, and growers may rely on honeybees, wild pollinators, or managed pollination plans to set a good crop. For all the sensors and spreadsheets, fruit still begins with flowers and insects in weather that may or may not cooperate. Climate pressure makes that cooperation uncertain. Warmer winters, erratic frosts, heat waves, drought, intense rainfall, and shifting pest ranges challenge growers in many apple regions. Apple trees need enough winter chill to rest properly, yet blossoms can be damaged by late cold snaps. A warm spell can wake buds too early. A sudden frost can turn a promising bloom into loss overnight. You stand in the orchard just before sunrise, and the air is tense. Growers light frost fans or use sprinklers to coat blossoms in protective ice, a method that looks absurd until it works. The trees glitter under artificial rain, each flower sealed in clear cold armour. The sound is eerie and beautiful, sprinklers ticking, fans roaring in the distance, ice crackling softly as it forms around petals. Your gloves grow wet. The cold settles into your fingers. The orchard smells of water, grass, and anxious machinery. This is not the sleepy postcard version of farming. This is the night watch, the gamble, the thin line between abundance and loss. The apple may be old, but its future is being negotiated in the dark at 3 a.m. by people staring at thermometers. Very glamorous. Naturally. Plant breeders work to widen the apple's possibilities. In research orchards and breeding programs, thousands of seedlings may be grown, tested, tasted, rejected, and occasionally celebrated. Most will never become named varieties. A promising apple must taste good, look appealing, resist disease if possible, bear reliably, store well, and survive handling. That is a demanding resume for a fruit. You bite into an experimental apple at a tasting table. The skin snaps. Juice spreads across your tongue. Someone nearby writes notes on texture, sugar, acidity, aroma, and aftertaste. The atmosphere smells of cut fruit, paper, disinfected counters, and quiet judgment. Genetic research adds another layer. Scientists study apple DNA to understand disease resistance, flavor compounds, ripening behavior, storage qualities, and ancestry. Marker-assisted breeding can help identify seedlings with desired traits much earlier than waiting years for full fruiting. This does not make breeding instant. Trees remain stubbornly tree-like, taking time to grow, flower, and reveal themselves. Science can speed decisions, but it cannot persuade an apple seedling to abandon its lifelong commitment to suspense. A quirky modern tidbit is that some new apples are protected by trademarks, club variety systems, or controlled licensing agreements. This means not every grower can simply plant certain fashionable apples. Access may be limited to approved producers under specific standards. The apple, once carried as seed in pockets and saddlebags, now sometimes travels with legal paperwork and branding guidelines. Somewhere, a wild seedling is probably laughing in a ditch. You walk through a supermarket produce aisle where this system becomes visible. Apples gleam under bright lights: red, pink, gold, green, striped, speckled, glossy, matte. Their names sound increasingly like perfumes, racehorses, or cheerful weather events. Customers choose by crispness, sweetness, memory, price, and colour. Some want tart apples for baking. Some want sweet apples for children. Some simply want whatever looks least likely to become soft by Tuesday. The fruit is familiar, yet every bin carries invisible networks of breeding, labour, storage, shipping, marketing, and risk. Outside the commercial mainstream, another kind of future is unfolding in heritage orchards, seed banks, old farmyards, and conservation collections. You enter a neglected orchard at the edge of a village. The grass grows high, lichen covers old branches. A broken gate leans against the hedge. The air smells of nettles, wet bark, fallen fruit, and leaves beginning to decay. Here, apples are not uniform. One tree bears russeted fruit with rough brown skin and a nutty scent. Another offers small yellow apples that bruise easily but taste like honey and spice. A third drops fruit so sharp your mouth tightens at first bite, then relaxes into interest. Conservationists and passionate growers search for lost or nearly forgotten varieties. Some old apples survive only because one tree remained near a farmhouse, churchyard, railway embankment, or abandoned garden. People compare old descriptions, local names, DNA tests, and community memories to identify them. The work is part detective story, part botany, part stubborn affection. Not every lost apple is delicious. Let us be honest. Some ancestors were very committed to sourness, but even an unfashionable variety may carry useful traits: disease tolerance, hardiness, unique flavour, late blooming, or adaptation to a particular place. Experts have not fully settled how best to balance modern commercial efficiency with genetic diversity, local resilience, and cultural memory. Large-scale production feeds markets reliably, but diversity protects against future shocks and keeps flavours alive that would otherwise disappear. A world with only a few dominant apples may be convenient, but it is also vulnerable and, frankly, a little boring. Diversity is not just nostalgia, it is insurance, beauty, and possibility growing on different branches. You visit a community orchard in late afternoon. Children run between trees while adults tie labels, mulch trunks, and argue gently about pruning. Someone pours fresh apple juice into paper cups. It tastes cloudy, cold, and bright. The grass smells warm in the sun. A robin hops near the path with bold professional interest. Community orchards bring apples back into shared life school gardens, urban parks, village greens, restoration projects, and small farms where people learn that fruit does not actually come from the back room of a grocery store. Shocking, but important. Technology enters even these softer spaces. Apps help identify varieties. Small sensors track soil moisture. Drones survey tree health. Orchard maps record bloom and harvest. Yet the tree remains physical. You still must prune with real hands. You still must smell rot in a fallen apple. You still must notice the leaf curl, the insect damage, the blossom timing, the feel of a branch under your fingers. Data can guide attention, but it cannot replace attention. The apple has always rewarded people who look closely. You stand at sunset in a research orchard where old and new trees grow near one another. The sky turns peach, then lavender. Nets hang along some rows to protect against hail. Irrigation lines snake through the grass. Beyond the fence, a wild hedgerow buzzes with insects. The scene is not purely natural, not purely mechanical. It is a partnership, sometimes awkward, sometimes brilliant. You hear leaves shifting in the cooling air. You smell dust, water, blossoms, and the faint sweetness of last season's mulch. The future apple may be bred for warmer climates, stronger disease resistance, reduced chemical use, better storage, richer flavour, or unusual colour. It may come from a laboratory-assisted breeding program, a heritage tree rediscovered by chance, or a seedling that surprises a grower in an ordinary field. It may be sold under a polished brand, shared at a local grafting workshop, or preserved quietly in a collection where visitors read labels in the rain. And somewhere, beyond markets and laboratories, an apple still falls into grass with a soft thud. A wasp finds it. A child picks it up. A gardener saves a seed even while knowing the result will be unpredictable. The old uncertainty remains alive inside the modern world. That is comforting in a strange way. Not everything can be planned. Not everything valuable arrives on schedule. Some sweetness still comes as a surprise. Now the orchard darkens, and the busy day lets go of itself. The wires and ladders fade into shadow. The leaves become a single soft whisper. You walk slowly beneath the trees, your hand brushing cool bark, your steps quiet in the damp grass. The scent of apples lingers low to the ground, mixed with night air and soil. The moon rises pale above the rows. Each fruit becomes only a gentle shape among leaves, neither ancient nor modern, simply present. You breathe in, and the world seems to settle with you. No market noise, no sharp tools, no hurried harvest, only branches resting under silver light. The orchard keeps its patient rhythm root. Bud, blossom, fruit, seed, sleep. And as the night deepens, you let the story soften too, until the apple is no longer a symbol or a crop or a problem to solve, but a small round sweetness in the dark, waiting quietly for morning.